You are crouched at the mouth of a cave in Britain, 10,000 years ago. The air coming off the river below is cold enough to sting. You have been scraping a hide since first light and your hands have gone numb. Someone calls your name from behind you. You turn around. Their skin is dark brown, so is yours, so is everyone's here. Nobody in this valley is pale. Nobody has been for as long as anyone remembers. Which is strange because the valley you are standing in is Europe. Give it a few thousand years and almost everyone here will look completely different. So what actually changed, and why did it happen so late? In 1903, workmen in a Somerset cave found a skeleton. It was the oldest complete human skeleton ever found in Britain. They called him Cheddar Man. He died around 10,000 years ago. For a century, nobody could say what he actually looked like. Museums guessed, and the guesses looked a lot like modern Britons. Pale skin, brown hair, the face you would expect. Then researchers drilled a tiny hole in the back of his skull. They pulled bone powder out and sequenced the DNA inside it. What came back rewrote the picture completely. Cheddar Man carried gene variants for dark skin. Not slightly tanned. His likely range was dark to dark and black. And at the same time, he almost certainly had blue eyes. That combination breaks almost everyone's mental image. Dark skin with blue eyes was not a fluke. It was ordinary for hunter-gatherers across ancient Europe. Spain, Luxembourg, Hungary, same result again and again. Those people lived here for thousands of years, looking nothing like the reconstruction. So the pale Europe we imagine is not the ancient one. It is the recent one, which raises the obvious question. What is skin color even made of? The reconstruction that followed became one of the most argued about images in British archaeology. Some people refuse to accept it outright, which says far more about the present than about the past. The bone did not care what anyone expected to find. At this point, a fair question is how anyone can possibly know this. Skin does not fossilize. It rots away within weeks of death. So there is no ancient skin sample sitting in a drawer anywhere. What survives is bone and sometimes teeth. And locked inside the densest parts of those, fragments of DNA. The best source is a tiny structure in the inner ear called the petrous bone. It is the densest bone in the human body. That density shields the DNA inside from water, heat, and bacteria for millennia. Researchers drill it, powder it, and read what is left. What comes out is not a clean genome. It is shredded. Ancient DNA arrives in fragments a few dozen letters long. Most of what they read is not even human. It is soil bacteria that colonize the bone after burial. So the first job is separating the human fragments from the noise. Then those fragments get matched against known positions in the genome. And pigmentation is read at specific known positions. Not one letter but a panel of them weighed together. The result is not a portrait, it is a probability. Which is why Cheddar Man is described as a likely range, not a fact. Good science states its uncertainty out loud. And the honest answer still rules out the pale reconstruction entirely. Contamination is the constant enemy in this work. A single touch from a modern researcher can swamp a 10,000-year-old sample. So the labs run in clean rooms, in full suits under filtered air. The result gets replicated in a second lab before anyone publishes. Which is why these findings held up when they overturned the textbooks. The same method has now been run on hundreds of ancient individuals. Not one skeleton argued over. A whole population sampled across millennia. That is what turned a striking anecdote into a measured trend. And the trend is what actually matters here. Your skin color comes down to one substance, melanin. It is a pigment made by specialized cells sitting in your skin. Those cells package melanin into tiny parcels and hand them to neighbors. Everyone has roughly the same number of those cells. That surprises people. It is not about how many cells you have. It is about how much melanin they make and which kind. There are two main kinds, one dark brown, one reddish yellow. The ratio between them sets almost everything you see. Melanin is not decoration. It is a filter. It sits above the cell nucleus like a parasol. The thing it is shielding you from is ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet is the part of sunlight you cannot see. It carries enough energy to break molecules apart, including the molecules inside your cells that store instructions. Too much of it damages you, that part everyone knows. But too little of it damages you too. And that is the part that explains everything that follows. Because sunlight is not simply a threat to be blocked. It is a resource you also have to let in. Your skin color is where those two demands settle. There is one more thing melanin does that rarely gets mentioned. It absorbs the energy it blocks and releases it as harmless heat, which is part of why dark skin feels warmer in direct sun. It is doing work constantly, entirely without your your involvement. Tanning is this same system reacting in real time over days. Your cells detect the damage and push out more pigment in response. It is a short-term version of what took Europe thousands of years. Go back far enough and our ancestors were covered in hair. Under that hair the skin was pale. Chimpanzees are like this today. Dark fur, light skin underneath. Then our ancestors lost the hair, probably to sweat efficiently while moving in open heat. But losing hair exposed bare skin to full equatorial sun. And equatorial ultraviolet is relentless, so the skin underneath had to darken fast. The usual explanation is protection from burning and cancer. That is real, but it is not the strongest pressure. Skin cancer mostly strikes after people have already had children. Evolution barely notices what happens after you reproduce. So there had to be something with earlier consequences. There was a vitamin called folate. Folate sits in the blood running just under your skin. Ultraviolet light passing into that layer destroys it. And folate is what builds a developing nervous system. Run low on it during pregnancy, and that development fails. Those consequences arrive immediately in the next generation, which is exactly the kind of pressure evolution responds to hard. So near the equator, dark skin was not incidental. It was the strongly protected, strongly selected state. There is a neat check on this whole idea. If folate protection really drove it, dark skin should track ultraviolet intensity closely. Measure both across the world, and they line up almost exactly. The main exceptions are populations that arrived somewhere recently, or ones eating diets unusually rich in the vitamins involved, which is precisely what the hypothesis predicts should happen. Estimates put the shift to dark skin somewhere around 1 to 2 million years ago, which makes dark skin the ancestral human condition by a wide margin. Everyone alive descends from populations that were dark-skinned. Then people walked north, and the sunlight got weaker with every latitude they crossed. In northern winters, the ultraviolet you need barely arrives at all. That sounds like good news for skin. It is not. Because that same ultraviolet does one job you cannot skip. It starts the reaction that makes vitamin D. Vitamin D is not really a vitamin. It behaves like a hormone. It controls how your body absorbs calcium. Without it, bones form soft and deform under load. In children, that produces bowed legs and a twisted pelvis. A deformed pelvis makes childbirth dangerous. So again, the cost lands squarely on reproduction. Dark skin in a dim northern winter blocks the little light available. You are protected from a threat that is no longer there, and starved of a resource you badly need. So the balance point moves. Less melanin, more light let through, more vitamin D. That is the vitamin D and folate trade in one sentence. High ultraviolet, protect folate, go dark. Low ultraviolet, rescue vitamin D, go light. Every human population sits somewhere on that line, and the line was drawn by latitude, not by anything else. There is a striking illustration of this cost in the archaeological record. Skeletons from crowded, smoky, sunless industrial cities show it clearly. Bones bent by rickets in populations living far from the equator. The same deficiency ancient migrants would have faced arriving centuries later. The problem never went away, we just changed which century met it. Clothing made the problem worse, not better. Cover your skin in a cold climate, and you block the little light you get. So the pressure fell hardest on the few parts left exposed. So how does a population actually change color? Not through one grand mutation, through a handful of small ones. Two matter more than the rest in Europe. The first is called SLC24A5. A single letter change in it lightens skin substantially. The second is SLC45A2. Together they account for much of the difference you see. Here is the part that surprised geneticists. The light version of the first gene is old, very old. It traces back roughly 22 to 28,000 years, long before anyone in Europe looked pale. And the identical version turns up in South Asia too. Not a similar version, the same stretch of DNA letter for letter, which means it did not arise twice. It arose once, then traveled in people along trade and migration. Genes do not spread on their own. Populations carry them. So the story of skin color is really a story of movement. Farmers moving out of the Near East carried that variant west. They met hunter-gatherers who had lived there for millennia. The two populations mixed, and selection kept pushing even after the mixing was done, which tells you the pressure was still real and still local. One more detail makes the timing strange. Carrying a light variant does not make a population light overnight. The variant has to spread generation by generation through everyone. That takes hundreds hundreds of generations even under strong selection, which is exactly why the gene is old and the appearance is recent. Now put dates on it. 8,500 years ago, hunter-gatherers in Spain were dark-skinned. Same in Luxembourg, same in Hungary. Neither light gene variant present in any of them. But go north to Sweden, 7,700 years ago. 7 individuals from one site, there carried both variants already. Light skin reached Scandinavia thousands of years before southern Europe, which is the opposite of a neat wave spreading outward. It is patchy, it is regional, it happens at different speeds. And the reason fits the trade exactly. The far north gets the least ultraviolet of anywhere people lived. So the pressure to lighten was strongest there and acted first. Meanwhile, southern Europe kept enough sun to keep folate at risk. So darker skin held on there for far longer. Across the continent as a whole, the tipping point comes late. Lighter skin only becomes the majority around 3,000 years ago. By then writing existed. The pyramids were already ancient monuments. Bronze was being worked across Europe. The pale Europe of the popular imagination is that recent, which means skin color is not an ancient fixed marker of anything. It is a moving response to where the light was. It is worth being careful about what this does and does not mean. It does not mean everyone in ancient Europe looked identical. Variation existed then as it does now. What changed is where the middle of that range sat. And the middle sat far darker for far longer than anyone assumed. Timelines like this tend to unsettle people, and that reaction is worth noticing. We expect the deep past to be a stable backdrop. It was not, it was moving the entire time. One more factor pushed the change faster. Sunlight is not the only way to get vitamin D. You can eat it. Oily fish carries a lot. Liver carries a lot. Hunter-gatherers ate plenty of both. Their diet quietly topped up what the sun did not provide. Then farming arrived, and diets narrowed to grain hard and fast. Grain carries almost no vitamin D at all, so the dietary safety net disappeared. Now skin was the only remaining source, which made every bit of extra light suddenly worth more. Selection for lighter skin intensified. Farmers also worked long hours outdoors, which cuts the other way. Evolution is a balance of competing pressures, never a single clean push. But the direction across Europe was consistent. Lighter over thousands of years, unevenly and recently. Not a moment, a slow drift with a clear cause. And the same drift ran independently elsewhere, which is the detail that undoes the whole racial reading of this. You can even see the trade running in the opposite direction elsewhere. Groups that moved north but kept eating fish stayed darker for longer. Their diet was still covering the vitamin the sun could not. Remove the fish and the pressure returns immediately, which is about as clean a natural experiment as this field ever gets. Northern Europeans are not the only light-skinned people. Populations in Northern Asia lightened too, but they did it using different genetic routes. Same problem, same latitude, different solution. That is convergence, and it is strong evidence. When nature solves a problem twice, the problem was real. It also means skin tone tracks latitude, not ancestry group. People at similar latitudes resemble each other in tone, even when their ancestries separated tens of thousands of years earlier. And the reverse holds too. Closely related groups can differ sharply in color, because color responds to the sky above you, not to the branch of the family tree you sit on, which is why sorting people by skin color never lines up with the genetics. The trait is shallow, recent, and repeatedly reinvented. It is one of the worst possible ways to group human beings, and one of the best illustrations of adaptation you will find, because you can read the sunlight of a place directly off it. Look at the far southern hemisphere, and the pattern repeats again. Populations at matching latitudes settled at matching tones on separate continents. No contact between them, no shared recent ancestry. Just the same sun doing the same arithmetic twice. Evolution is not creative. It is relentless. Give it the same problem and it grinds toward the same answer. So where does that leave you right now? Almost nobody lives at the latitude their skin evolved for. We moved faster than the trade could adjust. A dark-skinned person living in a northern winter gets very little vitamin D. A light-skinned person near the equator loses folate quickly. Neither is a flaw, both are mismatches of place. And there is a second mismatch nobody planned for. We moved indoors. Ancient humans got sunlight simply by existing outdoors all day. Now the light has to get through a window if it arrives at all. Which is why vitamin D deficiency is common in places with plenty of sky. Your skin is still running the same calculation it always did. Filter the light, let the light in, hold the balance. It just no longer knows where you are. The color you were born with is a record of somewhere else. A place your ancestors stood, under a particular amount of light, carried forward unchanged into a world of buildings and flights. So the next time someone calls skin color ancient and fixed, remember Cheddar Man. Dark-skinned, blue-eyed, and living in Britain 10,000 years ago. So here is the question worth sitting with. If the color you see is really just a record of sunlight, what else are we misreading as permanent? Subscribe for more questions about ancient humans actually answered. What should we figure out next? Leave it in the comments. None of this is a reason to change anything about your own skin. It is a reason to understand what you are looking at. A trait built by sunlight over thousands of years in a specific place, then carried somewhere else entirely in a single lifetime. 10,000 years is a long time to a person and almost nothing to a species. Cheddar Man is closer to you than he is to the first dark-skinned humans. You are looking at a very recent chapter of a very old story.